I heard this one rumor that you live in a military building, like an old military complex that you sort of took over, and that's where you live. And I want to believe that's true because it's one of the coolest things I've ever heard. Is it true?
It is true, and thank you for bringing it up because now even more people will come to the house to say hello. But yeah, I bought an old Air Force base. It's a former top secret Air Force base.
I'm a little more than that, Kevin.
Lookout Mountain Laboratories was a top secret U.S. Air Force installation nestled up in Laurel Canyon, the existence of which remained unknown until fairly recently. It was built World War II years, I believe, initially as a anti-aircraft installation to protect Los Angeles against a possible aerial attack during World War II, and then it morphed into a film studio at some point and was said to be the world's most complete self-contained film studio. The main purpose, according to various sources, was to process the raw film stock from the early atomic bomb tests and nuclear weapons tests. But that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because, like I say, this was a fully operational film studio that capable of doing everything in-house. They had, every animation department, editing facilities, film vaults, sound stages, everything to make a film from soup to nuts. And, to process raw film stock, all you really need is a darkroom. Could have been anywhere, there was no need to fly that film all the way, to this remote outpost in Laurel Canyon that was a fully functioning film studio. So obviously there was a lot more going on there than what has been acknowledged.
The Byrds, Buffalo Springfield, The Doors, Love, the Mamas and the Papas. To check out the work of Dave McGowan, Weird Scenes from Inside the Canyon. And McGowan, who unfortunately passed away a few years back, I think it was, maybe 2 years. I don't know exactly.
2015, I believe.
Yeah, 15. He draws out some very interesting facts about the early scene that was coming to shape what would later be more associated probably with the Haight-Ashbury scene in San Francisco. But it had its genesis. These bands all had their genesis in a little area outside of LA known as Laurel Canyon. And Laurel Canyon is a fascinating place.
Well, one of the strange things in the book that you mention is that people like John Wayne, Marilyn Monroe, these guys had ID passes. What were they doing there? Were they narrating things? Why would they need to be a part of this?
Yeah, some real heavyweights from Hollywood. Performers like Marilyn Monroe, John Wayne, as you mentioned. I think Jimmy Stewart, and very heavyweight filmmakers like I think John Ford and a couple others. Were involved. They had security clearance to work in this facility, and yet no one seems to know exactly what they did there.
Goodbye, Norma Jean. No, I never knew you at all. You had the grace to hold yourself.
Did Marilyn Monroe do the casting couch?
Yes! Come on, you read all those bios. She did the casting couch from when she started, from when she was like 17. She said that famous line.
What'd she say?
When she got her contract with Fox, she said, well, that's the last cock I'm going to have to... Hello, cut.
No, Pete.
That's the last cock I'm ever going to suck. No, cut again.
No,
that's
Pete. That's the last cock I'm ever going to have to suck.
Crawled out of the woodwork, and they whispered into your brain.
Hollywood. Well, the first time that I had an experience was with two very, very famous megastars, and it was at a party, and I was very new in town, and I was 21, but I was still quite innocent, and I was wearing an off-the-shoulder top. And these two guys, they were so famous, I can't tell you who they are because your lawyer said I'm not to mention any names.
Right.
And I said, because I wanted to make conversation, I don't really like this music. And one of them said, and I don't really like this. And he grabbed my top, which was elasticized, and pulled it like that.
Oh, God.
And the other one laughed at me, and I felt so humiliated. I just ran away.
They set you on the treadmill, and they made you change your name.
Marilyn had been so abused by men and had done so many things to get roles that she hadn't wanted to do. And most of these men, Holly, were fat and old and ugly and hideous.
So let me ask you this. What is happening in Hollywood?
Marilyn had been so abused.
It has been said by insiders that Marilyn was one of the first programmed presidential models, created under mind control for sex with presidents and use in Hollywood connections.
I'm just carrying on an old family tradition.
Marilyn Monroe was a monarch sex slave. It is public knowledge that she was sexually abused as an orphan. But it has been skillfully kept from the public that she was a presidential model monarch slave. President Kennedy found her more entertaining than Jackie.
Family tradition.
Despite her fame, Monroe was a deeply unhappy woman. She was adored by many, but did anyone really know her? She was incredibly lonely. Born Norma Jean Mortensen, Monroe's life was marked by tragedy. Abandoned by a mentally ill mother who had once tried to attack her, Monroe grew up in a series of foster homes before getting married at the age of 16 and dropping out of high school. This, along with the fact that she never knew her father, further contributed to her isolation and her desire to have a family.
She had, mental disturbances, and she was taken away. I called every woman I would see, I'd say, oh, there's a mama. And if I see a man, I'd say, there's a daddy. One morning I was having a bath, actually, and I referred to the woman as Mama, and she said, I'm not your mother. Don't call me mother anymore. Call me Aunt so-and-so.
And it seems to me you lived your life like a candle in the wind. Never know who to cling to when the rain set in.
I think that what we're dealing with is a generation of victims. It's like Russ Dizdar talks about when people are programmed by these Luciferian handlers. Part of the programming is that they become a Satanist themselves or a practitioner of witchcraft.
Jay, do you have anything you want to say about the prior history of Laurel Canyon before the 1960s?
Well, there are older precedents that Dave does mention. For example, Houdini.
Mm-hmm.
Houdini was a Laurel Canyon resident. Apparently, he was also a Mason and to some degree worked as an intelligence asset. I want to say, if I recall, was it Scotland Yard? I think that is who McGowan says. You know, there was also reportedly strange deaths, I think, that occurred in the vicinity of wherever Houdini lived in the canyon. As I was telling you guys before we started, I went a couple of years ago, 2 summers ago at this very time. I was in California and we were checking out Lookout Mountain Studios and Wonderland Avenue and Mahan Drive and Rand Corporation and all that stuff. And you do get a weird vibe. You also have the Vacaville prison facility in the same vicinity. and that was, at least there's some indication that this was connected to mind control experimentation, the Air Force basically having its own private secret studio, and of course you have Walt Disney, Cary Grant, Jimmy Stewart, and Marilyn Monroe all having basically DoD clearance access to come to Laurel Canyon Studios. It's a very important thing. It's not something irrelevant to American culture. We don't even know all the stuff that was filmed there and what its purposes were. So there's a lot
some of
mystery
that
surrounding it.
There was allegedly over 19,000 films made in this government facility, and this was beginning in the 1940s.
Right.
So what ended up happening with respect to the music scene, and the music, people looking at this in the current year may think that the mass migration of various aspiring musicians across the country to this little canyon outside of Los Angeles was because it was a big place to be. But the thing that's interesting is that it was not actually at the time. Right. This was created from scratch because the centers of music in America were places like Memphis and New York.
CIA created my popular culture, and they're so in love with black arts and Crowley. Illuminati wants my mind, soul, and my body. They can't have it, they can't have it, no.
I belong to Jesus Christ, and I was commissioned to preach his gospel and expose the wicked ones
whose dirt weighs more than a ton.
The battle's already won.
Jesus is my savior,
and until all you watching this now know him,
you're fast asleep, kid. Fast asleep, fast asleep, fast asleep, fast asleep. Secret society always trying to keep their eye on me, but I'm gonna stay safe under the wing of the Most High.
Most High, Most High, Most High.
You kind of have in California a military-industrial complex state. The whole state is pretty much run by, the Navy and the deep state, so to speak. California is kind of a lab experiment, a test bed for mind control experimentation, things to come in the rest of the country 20 or 30 years later. It kind of starts there, and then it, like a virus, it sort of spills out to middle America. Same with New York. It was not hard to believe, especially with the Air Force studio being there, that even then it was intimately connected to Hollywood. The highest people in Hollywood were coming to Laurel Canyon, and so it's not hard to believe that they could set up a test bed for a burgeoning revolutionary music scene.
Turn on, tune in, and drop out.
Fast asleep, fast asleep. Folks, it's so obvious. Create the problem, provide the solution. Start the war in Vietnam, lead the protest. Create a war on drugs, create a counterculture revolution for people to consume drugs, sell them the drugs, lock them up. In every single instance, you retain the power. And it all is about power with these folks.
Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order. In the words of Winston Churchill, a world order in which the principles of justice and fair play protect the weak against the strong. Protect the weak against the strong.
Out of chaos.
Former US President George H.W. Bush has been accused of sexual misconduct again. A woman says he groped her as she took a photo with him some 14 years ago.
Order out of chaos, but
the magic date. I mean, that comes from Terence McKenna, who was one of the LSD. He of course was promoting these heroic doses of these psychedelic drugs, enough literally to produce psychosis. When it was determined later on that he wasn't taking, even though it looked.
Oh, really? Terence McKenna wasn't taking the acid trip?
Of course not. Of course not. His brother admitted that no, he hadn't taken any drugs in 20 years. In fact, he mainly just drank booze. This really shouldn't surprise anyone because the entire psychedelic movement was vetted. It comes out of the CIA project MK Ultra. Robert Hunter, who was the lyricist of the Grateful Dead, and that therefore they had to follow his instructions. They were both known as employees of the organization. Gordon Wasson, interested in psychedelic drugs. Now, it just so happened he was also the director of public relations and a vice president at J.P. Morgan Bank, and was also the head of the Council of Foreign Relations, right? So a little suspicious. But then, as it turns out, with the Freedom of Information Act, you can find out that Wasson's entire development of the psychedelic mushrooms in Mexico was this MK Ultra project. And this isn't open for contention. I mean, the letter exists showing that Wasson arranged for funding for all of the trips to Mexico through the CIA and MK Ultra. And so you have to say, well, what are they doing? Why is all of this psychedelia, such an important thing? Well, it turns out that they really wanted to start developing the neo-feudalism probably right after World War II. Gregory Bateson, who was Margaret Mead's husband, against using the Freedom of Information Act, letters have been found. They're published in a well-known book called Weaponizing Anthropology by Dr. David Price, showing that Bateson actually, though he claimed to be a proponent of psychedelic drugs and a big humanist, right? He's always telling people peace and love, speaker at the Esalen Institute. Now, in his real life, he was instructing the government of the United States and Britain in how to operate a more effective slave colony. And in the letters that Price has found, it shows Bateson describing experiments of the Russian government on their Asiatic populations to determine how they can best be kept in a slave state. And he says that the experiment that showed the best of a inferior population, he uses that expression, that exact term, being controlled by a superior population, was that you had to develop a native revival or an archaic revival. In other words, you don't want the inferior people being jealous of the technology that the rulers had. Rather, you wanted them to embrace their past, right? So this was why you have Bateson being at the very first meetings where MK Ultra is established, evidently explaining to them how to do it. You then go on until you have all of these rock and roll people who just come out of nowhere that give away LSD for free. And in the midst of all this, you have this philosophy about peace, love, returning to the commune, and living off the land and kind of abandoning technology. And so then you have the same phenomena occurring up in San Francisco, where you have all of these people, the Grateful Dead and Ken Kesey and LSD being given away en masse. And I mean en masse. I mean, the Grateful Dead would have hundreds of thousands of tabs that they somehow miraculously had, and they just gave it away to everyone for free. So what's going on here? Well, it's the archaic revival, brother. You're looking at your government in action, and they're trying to dumb down the population, to drop you out of technology. A new world order.